Hello and welcome again to Digital Profile Art of the Artist. I'm your host, Jazzy Earl. Our channel is dedicated to showcasing artists from the Kansas City area with a unique perspective about them and their work. We hope you will like our channel, and if you do, please hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the bell notification. In today's program, we are going to visit artist Chris Fleck, who enjoys creating portraits and sports murals. Let's take a quick look at some of Chris's work and then spend some time getting to know him and his work.
Chris Fleck, C-H-R-I-S, F like Frank, L-E-C-K. Well, my mother kept the first recognizable drawing that I made. And people ask how my career started. I said it started back in the 60s with a drawing of a rabbit when I was 2 years old. And she said, she asked what it was, and I told her, and she said, I got to looking at it, and you're 2 years old, and it had a head, and it had ears, and she said I could tell it was a rabbit. And, I heard the story all my life. Well, not too long ago, I had her dig it out, and she was right. It looked like a rabbit. Since I could hold a crayon, it was just, art was what I loved to do. As a kid, and this is going to date me, when TV Guide would come in the mail, I would look through it to see, well, first I'd check who was on the cover, and I'd try and draw, anybody that I liked that was in the TV Guide every week. So that was my first source of how to get a likeness. So I would draw off of those photos. And one day we had a visiting artist it had to be 7th grade, and so she wanted to look at our work, and so I brought this album, and hardly any other kid in the art class had an album full of their work, so I brought this scrapbook, and she goes through it, and she says, boy, you do a lot of portraits. And I didn't even think about it. It was just what I enjoyed, and it's what I thought of when it came to drawing. So that was when I first had a little self-awareness that portraits were my thing. No, I don't have a preference of medium, but I seem to be doing a lot of oil painting lately. But when I do a mural, it's latex house paint. So I also draw caricatures, and that's all in pencil and then permanent marker. And so I like a variety of media. Yeah. I was born and raised in St. Joseph, Missouri, and went away to college to the University of Kansas, which is a whole hour and 10 minutes away, and then came back and got into video. As a kid, I was, I've always been an artist, but also a multi-potentialite. I enjoyed comedy. I enjoyed visual art, music. Always had an aptitude for music. I play harmonica. I've wormed my way in to sit in with some famous people here and there. Great trick is to walk into a bar like the Phoenix, ask the band if they have a harmonica player, When they start to apologize because they don't, I say, do you want one? And they say, do you know what you're doing? And I say, well, I have a whole suitcase full of them in the car. And then the next response is usually, go get them. And I do, and it's a lot of fun. So I've been in some bands. When I was a kid, I did a comedy hour out of our garage. The garage was the theater, and I told all the neighbor kids what to do. And I was kind of the director and one of the stars. And later I went on to, after my divorce, I went on to do some stand-up comedy. I had collected notes all my life for things that I thought would be funny or clever. And I've always been a stand-up comedy junkie. I've probably seen, well, let me think. Comedy Central has a top 100 outstanding comics, and I have seen 14 or 15 of them live, and a whole bunch of others that have taken off after that list was compiled. And I've met some. I used to be a frequent caller on Dennis Miller's radio show, and his podcast a little bit. They didn't take a lot of live calls, but I've got a greatest hits on my YouTube channel. And when a national treasure like Dennis Miller laughs at your joke, I mean, that made my week. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. My dad was more of a vocalist, but he did theater, and I was in some plays. And I remember as a child, he would lay down with me with paper and a pen, and we would draw clowns. And clowns were kind of a big deal with me when we were a kid. I remember going to the circus with my family, and a little dwarf clown walked by, and I said, "There's Jimmy Armstrong." And my dad whipped around and said, "How did you know his name? He hasn't been on yet." And I said, "Well, he was there last year. That's Jimmy Armstrong. Jimmy Armstrong was a big deal to me." I've always had a clown fetish. And people are scared of clowns, and that's because they've been bastardized in movies because kids trust clowns. And okay, John Wayne Gacy, one bad apple. But yeah, I wanted to be a clown when I was a kid. That's probably what led to the stand-up comedy. And in college, I did a series of caricatures that were based on, they were caricatures of well-known comics. I've got an Eddie Murphy and a Sam Kinison, and so those were fun. Both. I have been an artist since I was old enough to hold a crayon in my little hand, but I was always interested in learning. I remember attending a workshop from a visiting artist at a really young age. It might have been, I went to several things at the Albright Kemper Museum of Art here in town. When I was in high school, our art teacher recommended this little old lady that taught oil painting out of her basement, and we'd show up and she would pull out, like the Bob Ross pictures or the Bill Alexander. I think it was more Bill Alexander because this was back in the 70s, or no, the 80s, before Bob Ross really took off. Anyway, she would pull out these books and you would pick a landscape and put it up and sit and duplicate that stuff. So I remember I had one or two paintings from that class, and my mom said, "What do we do with these? Do we hang them on the wall?" And I said, "No, they went in the attic." I wasn't there to make a masterpiece. I was there to learn how to work with paint on a palette, how to mix colors, how to use medium. And so to me, I was learning technique and what to do with a fan brush, and I don't do much with a fan brush anymore, but different brushes, different techniques, and how to control the paint on a palette. So I learned all that, and it was fun and interesting, but no, the paintings didn't go on the wall from that class. Went to the University of Kansas. I shopped around, and my KU friends won't want to hear this, but I went to MU and I said, I'd like to see your art department. And they said, well, we really don't have an art department. And I said, thank you, and I left. And then I found out about the University of Kansas, and that Hallmark at the time, I don't know, what's going on now, but Hallmark pumped a lot of money into the curriculum. And so it didn't take too long for me to decide on the University of Kansas. I had considered the Art Institute of Kansas City, but I wanted sort of the well-rounded college experience. So I went with KU and had a pretty good exposure to a lot of different possibilities with art. So I remember a trip to New York that we took that was a great. I got to see a lot of Rembrandts and hear some really talented artists speak. Really enjoyed my 5 years at the University of Kansas. Toward the end of my studies at KU, as an illustration major, they offered us the opportunity to do portraits of musicians that they featured on the cover of their local NPR programs that they had in all the shops in Lawrence. And so the trade-off was, if you do the artwork for us, we'll give you all the unused printed covers, and they take them off. They called them tear sheets. And before you had a website, that was how you got your art out to potential companies that would want to hire you to do work. So that I did two. One was Andre Segovia, which I think turned out really nice, and the other was Beethoven. And so I got to looking at Beethoven. I couldn't find, I found out that he died obviously before photographs came about. So all there were paintings from other artists of Beethoven. And I didn't want to paint off of their paintings. And so my solution was to find a model that resembled Beethoven. And so I'm talking to my roommate, and I said, I need to find a guy with a square jaw and a cleft chin and deep set eyes and a German nose and cheekbones about right here. And we just stopped, and I went, wow, I guess this is going to be a self-portrait. And so I got a shop light where we did some real dramatic lighting, and I threw on a smoking jacket that I had from a fraternity pajama party, and a white dress shirt and a scarf, and I tried to emulate the way they had the knot tied in the paintings. And then I did that scowl that Beethoven makes. And so my take was to listen to his music the entire time I painted the portrait, and it gave it this stormy look that I felt when I listened to his, especially the Fifth Symphony, which everybody, is his most famous work, but everything had kind of a stormy quality to it. So that came out in the painting, and then this high contrast light, which Rembrandt's my hero, and that's called chiaroscuro, where it's modeled out of the darkness. And that's, I've mentioned Rembrandt 2 or 3 times. Yeah, he's the guy that I try to emulate with very little success, but he's my goal, he's my marker. And so I got this modeled look, and when it all came together, I put the pictures down from the other artists and tweaked the facial features back less like me and more like what they perceived him to look like. And then it made the cover of KANU, their program. And I submitted that not too long ago to an art show, and it hangs at the hospital here in town, and it was rejected by the judges because they said it might make people feel unsettled. And I didn't get that at all. I just thought it was kind of intense, but I didn't make it maniacal on purpose. But he has this intense feeling I get when I listen to his music. So that came out intentionally. So I did 2 musician portraits for KANU radio at the University of Kansas. The second was Andre Segovia. And I found his photograph on a CD cover, and it was lighted brilliantly. And I decided to use that as my source. So I listened to Segovia's music the entire time I painted that piece. And it really turned out to be the best thing I'd ever painted. And I used that for years, not to paint anything else, really. Now, part of it was after graduation, I didn't have a studio. And so I packed up my paints, and it was my one day I'll have a house with an attic that I can build a studio in. And that took years and years and years. And the whole time I had that on the wall in my living room, and it was the best thing I'd ever painted. And so it was a little intimidating. And one day, and this is after I began painting again, and I got my work online, I got a call from a lady, and she had seen it online, and she bought that painting. And so then I didn't have the best thing I'd ever painted in my life. I remember that day, I was so torn. I never not wanted $2,000 so much in my entire life. She gave me full price, and it broke my heart to let go of it, but it was liberating at the same time, and it sort of challenged me to paint again, and I've been going at it ever since. As artists, my influences, I'd have to say Rembrandt is my the artist that I like to emulate, because his he did a lot of self-portraits that you can just tell if that guy walked by, you'd recognize him. And likeness has always been a big deal with me, as well as Rembrandt, to me, paints like a sculptor. And I try and think like that too, how three-dimensional it looks, because he's constantly modeling the images. And that's what I try to pull from what I observe with Rembrandt. And chiaroscuro is the modeling of the form out of darkness. So there's a fine line between modeling something out of darkness and having it come off as a black velvet painting. We don't want that. But it's just one of my favorite things, is to pull 3D out of darkness. I've done some sculpture. Really enjoy that. What other? I think music is art, and I've always been a musician. I'm a writer. And I've written some stand-up comedy, and I've performed that. I did a little theater. I'd have to say most of it is portraiture. I'm a portrait artist. I don't really want to limit myself to be a portrait artist, but that's kind of my thing that gives me a buzz. I love to capture a likeness. I'll do oil paintings. I'll do caricatures at events. I just enjoy capturing a likeness of a person. And I'll tell you one thing, that when somebody asks me what I offer with my art, one Christmas a couple years ago, I decided to paint my late grandmother, my mom's mom, for my mother for Christmas. And as the painting was coming together, I was just kind of on autopilot, and then I stepped back a good, I don't know, 3 or 4 yards. I do that a lot when I paint because it looks a lot different when you step away from it. That's how it's usually viewed. And so I pulled back just to give it a glance, and all of a sudden I was looking at my grandmother and I teared up. And if I can do that for other people, that's a gift. It's an honor, a pleasure for me to do for other people. It's what I enjoy about painting, that I can share a moment with somebody else. I'd have to say portraiture. Just about everything I do has people and capturing a moment in time. Even if it's a person sitting for a portrait, I try and find something about that person that shows up in the portrait, like the music with Beethoven, just the whole person and not just a likeness. I've fallen into a theme. When a buddy of mine bought a new house, he inherited some money when his mother passed away, and he'd been collecting Chiefs paraphernalia and Royals memorabilia all his life. Everything's autographed, everything's in a mounted case, jerseys, shoes, helmets, bobbleheads, anything you can think of. This friend of mine could open a museum in his basement, and it would be like, it wouldn't take much to have it declared an actual museum. And as this was coming together, he was talking about what he was going to do at the place. And so I came over and checked it out. And I said, you know, what you really need here is a mural. And he says, yeah, I've got a little place over here, and I thought maybe you could paint like a couple of players right over there. And I said, Bob, you've got this great big wall where you come down the stairs into your basement, and it's like 10 feet wide, 7 or 8 feet tall. And I said, why don't you set the tone right there? And he said, could you do that? And I said, yeah, I'm a portrait artist. And he said, well, I want to know what you charge. And I told him, and he said, I'm not going to ask you for a special rate. And, you know, I probably would have given him a special rate, but God bless him for not asking for a special rate. And so 3 years later, we had this mural finished. I decided to open up Arrowhead Stadium and the K because they're right next to each other. So it kind of made it all one thing. And we put the Royals on one side and the Chiefs on the other. So about a year or a year and a half in was when Patrick Mahomes took the scene, where he was the starting quarterback. And he said, I want to wait until the end of the season, maybe the spring, and then maybe we'll put Patrick on there. I want to see how he does. And so, you know, a few games in, it was apparent that Patrick was going to make the mural. So I photoshopped where he was going to go, and I sent my friend Bob a mock-up, and he sent it to some friends, and one of them was a bar owner at Johnny's on 7th in Kansas City, and that happened to be the contact for a reporter from the New York Times who did a story on the 2015 Royals World Series. So he came to town and did that, and he made these connections. And when Patrick blew up, they decided to send him back to Kansas City and do a, you know, since he already had a lot of KC connections, and use them to formulate a story on Mahomes Mania. So somehow he contacted Chris at Johnny's on 7th and said, I'm looking for a guy who is a fanatic. He's got a personal license plate. He's got everything autographed. He's got a whole man cave. And the guy said, just stop. I know who you're talking about. And he sent him Bob. And so Bob gets a text and he thinks it's a joke. Yeah, right, New York Times, whatever. And finally the guy convinced him that it was legit, and he said, I understand you have Patrick on your mural. And he said, no, Patrick's the next guy we're gonna have painted on the mural. And he said, well, we're coming to town Monday, and that's kind of a deal breaker. And so Bob said, let me make a call. So I get a call on Saturday night, and Bob says, remember we were talking about painting Patrick on the mural? Yeah, think you can have that done by Monday? And I said, Monday, what time? He told me the whole story about the article and how he wasn't going to make it without the painting. And I said, what time? And he said, 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And I said, let me pack a bag. And so it was like a hostage situation. First I watched the football game, the Chiefs game on Sunday. So that put us out at about 5 o'clock. I started painting and painted until midnight, and then got up at the crack of noon the next day. And I painted until 7 or 8 o'clock, 7:30 maybe. I'm pulling the blue tape off the mural, and that's when the doorbell rang and the photog showed up. So it worked out barely. And I told the photographer, I said, careful, it's wet. And it made the New York Times. And so that was cool because the picture that they chose from Bob's extreme man cave was my mural, and they gave me a name drop, so that was nice. Anyway, after the mural, I decided I wanted to paint a realistic portrait of Patrick, because the mural was more of a caricature bobblehead kind of a thing where we blew the heads up to make them look comical. So then I did a realistic portrait of Patrick, and that took off. And between the two, I started to get a reputation as being a sports artist. And at first, I was kind of worried about being Christopher Reeved into a category that I couldn't get out of. But really, I'm a portrait artist, and this is just a genre that I'm fitting into. And I enjoy it. It's fun. And there's a community of artists that do fan-based art that they're really supportive. It's not competitive like you'd think. And they're a great group to trade ideas with, to support each other. And I'm involved in a show coming up with sports artists at First Friday on October the 7th at Mod Gallery. It's multiple sports artists that First Friday. Usually it's somebody that resonates with me. That sounds selfish, but sometimes I end up painting heroes. I did a comedy series, a stand-up comic series in college, and they were caricatures out of oil pastel, but they still meant a lot to me. I'm a stand-up comedy junkie, and so it held my interest, and so I hope that shows through to other people that view it. Just somebody that I think that I have interest with, or that I'm interested in, just sort of how I perceive things. As the sports art that I've started producing has caught on, I've gotten more work out of that, and I've done 3 murals, and then I continue to do more sports-oriented painting because they're just popular in this area. And I'd have to say the first painting I did of Patrick Mahomes is still my favorite. I think it just it captures his essence better than anything so far, and I enjoy painting him because he's such a positive person, and it shows through what he's done. I love that the minute he showed up in Kansas City, he started doing philanthropy and investing in the area, and he's just an interesting guy with a hell of a lot of talent, and in a way I feel like I'm kind of giving back to celebrate him. Also, I give away 10% of that painting when I sell a print to Alzheimer's research, because it's an issue that we're dealing with in my family, and so that's my chosen charity to work with. When I pick a subject, I do a lot of research on photographs that reflect that person, and I'm interested in composition and likeness, and so I put a lot of thought into the visuals that I use when I do the painting. A lot of times it's an amalgam of different photos, and sometimes I'll Frankenstein some things together in Photoshop and work from that. I try not to think about how people will judge what I'm painting. I try and think about what I see in the subject, and then it's about color choices and composition, and this reminds me of a story. In college, you had to decide whether you were going to be in design or in fine art. And at the time, I thought being an illustrator was going to be more of a lucrative decision, more of a way to earn a steady income than just hoping people would like my paintings. And so I chose the design path. But what I didn't care for was, at the time, the two programs in the art and design building were kind of at odds. As an illustration major, toward the end of my college career, I started to plan paintings in my painting class, and I took as many painting classes as I could, but I remember in the last painting class I took, we were tasked with doing a still life. And the instructor, when we did our critique, he went right to mine and he said, Mr. Fleck, is this an illustration or is this a painting? And I immediately knew where we were going with this, and it was an argument that I'd heard so many times. I was so tired of the discussion. And he said, is it a painting or an illustration? And I said, yes. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, it's a painterly illustration, or it's an illustrative painting. And I said, if this were a bowl of fruit, I had chosen to do a cheeseburger with fries and a beer, and I painted it just like I would have any other still life. But for my portfolio, it was something that you could maybe see in a menu or whatever. And so I said, if this were a bowl of fruit, we wouldn't be having this discussion, would we? I have one more KU story that I have to tell. We had a photography instructor, and he was from China. And his name is Pak Chi Lao. I think he's still alive, and I think he's still working. But his whole shtick was to ask homeowners in Johnson County and the surrounding area if he could come into their home and photograph it. And a lot of people were delighted that a famous photographer wanted to photograph their house. So he would spend his entire time finding humor in the way the house was decorated. He would come into your home and he would make fun of your decor. And where the pictures were hysterical, it made me wonder how he would feel if somebody did that to him. So the first assignment he gave us was a social commentary. And I went to every Chinese restaurant in Lawrence and I did it right back to him. And I decided he's either going to love it or he's going to hate it. And either way, I'm going to make my point just like he made his. And so I rolled the dice, and he called me in after class. And he said, Mr. Fleck, your darkroom skills are horrid. And I said, yeah, I know. He said, I can see lint on this picture and I can see a little overexposure on this one. And I said, okay, but I want to tell you, I have been dying to do this since I got here, and the Chinese community is so small and tight-knit, I would have been ostracized. So thank you so much. I don't care about your darkroom skills. I'm giving you an A for this project just because I love what you've done, and we became friends. My first video project was an audition tape for the Muppets. I started writing letters to companies that I'd love to work with, and one of them was the Muppets. When most little kids were learning their alphabet, I was trying to figure out how Big Bird's mouth worked. I wasn't, I was in on the joke. And I remember critiquing things when I was a kid, like comedy albums. I remember being cognizant of production and script and things that little kids usually don't consider until they're much older. I decided in college to start launching promo packets to whoever, whatever big job I'd like to land, and I always thought the Muppets would be a good fit for me. And so I put an impression tape that I had. I did voices, and I had famous people on one side of the cassette, and on the other side was a group of cartoon characters and Muppets. And I think that's where I might have gotten their attention. And so I sent artwork and big long letter about how I'd always followed the Muppets, but I'm sure they got a lot of that. So one day I came home from class and I had a message on my answering machine. It was from Hinson Associates, and they received my packet and they wanted to invite me to a special invitation-only Muppet workshop. And so I listened to it a couple of times to make sure I wasn't dreaming, and I called my parents, and my mom said, talk to your grandparents, they're looking for a graduation gift for you. And so they sent me $300, and I wrote a script and hired a guy in the radio TV department to put together this audition tape. And I bought fake fur and hot glue and ping pong balls, and I wrote the script and backseat directed with this guy and put together the audition tape and made it there by their deadline and got an invitation, and I got to meet Jim Henson, and his wife interviewed me one-on-one, and we were in an isolated room, and I could just feel that we were being recorded, his wife and I, and she had this box, and she slides a Muppet across the table, and she says, put a voice to that one. And I said, okay, and I did, and slides another one, and it's a monster, and whatever. And then the third one, she slides Kermit across the table and says, put a voice to that one. And I said, I can't. And she said, why? And I said, you're Kermit's wife. And she said, give it a shot. This one's important. And looking back, I think maybe they knew he wasn't well before they announced it. Or maybe they were just looking to delegate and he was wanting to slow down or get involved in film and less of the Muppet Show and Sesame Street and that kind of thing. So anyway, spoiler alert, I didn't get the job, but it was a great experience that I'll never forget. So the Muppet audition was my first taste of video. So right out of college, I got a job at the ABC affiliate and started there as a production assistant for the news department, and really enjoyed that. But I was there to try and get a job making commercials, and that eventually happened, and I did that for about a year and then transitioned over to the cable company. And by that time I had won some awards. I think my first commercial at the ABC affiliate won an award. And so I had a reputation as an award-winning commercial producer and started handling my clients like I was their small boutique ad agency. So I had kind of a system where I would do a meeting, talk about their goals, and then come up with something fun and creative that would stick in people's minds. And you know, I was a child of television, so this was a real logical fit for me and my creativity. And with my art background, I could show up and do storyboards. And in my local market, people weren't really used to that. So it was fresh for them, exciting and fun for both of us. And I was only going to do that for a couple of years. And 30 years later, they closed my department down. And now I do it on my own. Right now I'm doing First Friday in Kansas City. That's where I show my work. In the past, I had hung some of my pieces in conjunction with the local Museum of Art and the hospital. They, Albright Kemper Museum of Art and Mosaic had a joint venture where we would hang our pieces in the hallways at the hospital. And currently, I'm doing First Fridays in Kansas City. And that's between those shows and my online gallery, that's where I show my work. First Friday is pretty unique. You get a large spectrum of attendees. The crowd's pretty diverse, and you can look at other artists too, and so I've seen some things that kind of influence maybe what I'm going to do next. You can always go to my website, chrisfleckart.com, and I'm always on Facebook and most social media. So anything that if I have a work in progress or some newer items, you can see those. But my website is 24/7, and you can always contact me on Messenger on Facebook. I really like to represent my subject in a different way, or let's say a unique way. I'm worried about likeness. I'm concerned about likeness, and maybe the emotions that person brings to the viewer.
Thank you for joining us on Digital Profile Art of the Artist. I'm Jazzy Earl. To see more of Chris's work, look for the links listed below. We hope you have enjoyed our program, and if so, please hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the bell notification.